Hey everyone, welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Cecil Laird.
Fuego here.
I'm Mercer.
Marcia.
And we are back. Now that the movie is finally out, we are here to discuss the spoilers for Blair Witch 2016.
Yeah, hashtag.
Absolutely. Now, let's get into it, guys. There was a lot of cool in this movie. I think I really loved this movie, frankly. Yeah. I was not a fan of the first one, but having watched the first one just before going to this one, I really dug the hell out of this one because they did everything from the first one right.
I think that if you didn't watch the first one before going into it, I think a lot of things might go over your head, where it's fresh in your mind, and the questions that we had prior to going into the second one and having them being answered just made it that much better. Because I was like, oh man, they're answering. Remember we asked that?
Yeah. Because me and Mercer were talking about this right after the screening, right? We were like, would it be better if you had not watched the original?
Yeah.
It definitely enriched the experience a little bit, right?
I mean, yeah, the first one, a lot of people thought it was just kind of, oh, why didn't they do this? I think they picked up right where they left off. They kind of, tied up this loose end, this loose end, and it just made the movie that much better.
Yeah. It's not very often that you jump into a world and make a sequel better, especially in the horror world. I mean, I can think of maybe Aliens doing that, but holy crap, man, they took a concept and expanded upon it and just ran with it. And
they had a lot of
made it way scarier.
Expand,
the first one was like this, and they're like,
Well, but they did a great job of expanding on it within the story. It didn't. What I was worried was that there were going to be like breaks taken for the characters to explain everything to us. And there wasn't much of that. The only time you can kind of say that is when they're walking through the woods the first time, when they're entering, and we're getting a bit of backstory from the Blair Witch nerds, right? The ones that know about the Blair Witch and that ultimately get screwed. But they're talking about stuff and they're telling, oh, well, because they said, the killer would take people to the attic, and they're like, actually, there's some debate on that, whether it was the attic or the basement.
Because
and I
thought about the basement. I immediately thought.
Because it was the basement in the original, and I think that, honestly, that was the filmmakers addressing the people that all this time have been like, the story says it was in the attic, but then you guys have him in the basement. What the f***?
All the speculation about
it. They went ahead and explained it away with one line, the guy going, actually, there's speculation on whether it's the attic or the basement, and I was like, you clever motherfucker.
Right.
So the first big thing I want to spoil is this. You guys, we finally get to see the Blair Witch.
Yay!
And that is cool for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
First is something that I picked up on, and I'm sure everyone picked up on this, but at one point in that explanation I was just talking about, the blurds, the Blair Witch nerds.
Hashtag blurds.
They mentioned something about, they're like, well, what isn't talked about a lot is that the way they killed the Blair Witch, when they're talking about the story from the 1800s, the original Blair Witch, which I think the name, that was revealed in Book of Shadows or something, because they didn't touch on the name, but they said the name like we were supposed to know the name of the original Blair Witch.
I think it might have been.
I think it might have been.
I thought that they were talking about the name
too
of the
quick and
original
clean for it to not have been in Book of Shadows.
I'm
tell you
pretty
soon.
sure that they did kind of talk about it in the first one, though.
Did they mention the actual name? Because they knew the name of the Blair Witch.
Well, I thought it was the name of the town and that they changed the name.
No, they talked about that, but no, they never mentioned the name of the Blair Witch. That's why I think that might have come from Book of Shadows.
Because when they were talking to the old the crazy lady.
No, she didn't mention any actual name, but anyway, and it's neither here nor there. But so one of the things he mentions is that the way they killed her was that they put her in essentially a medieval rack. Where they were stretching, makeshift medieval rack where they were stretching her limbs, and then they left her to die.
Well, it wasn't a rack. They tied her up to the tree and put stones on her limbs.
But he called it.
Called
it a rack,
which was like a homemade rack.
Essentially a homemade rack,
which answers a lot of the questions of the dolls.
Yes.
So they answered it all because that's
there was the direct correlation. And speaking about the dolls.
Well, but I didn't finish on that real quick. I gotta finish that because he mentioned that, and I filed that away. I was like, they stretched her. I'm like, if we see the Blair Witch, she's gonna be all long and gangly and creepy looking, like Wreck, the Spanish movie Wreck that was then remade into Quarantine. If you watch that, you finally see the big bad at the end, and it is essentially a woman that's all big and gangly that just kind of is walking weird and swinging a hammer and stuff. That always stuck with me. So when he said she stretched, I was like, oh, this could be good. And I was right.
Yeah.
You only caught 2 glimpses of her.
And
they were very quick. But they were very unnerving because when we saw her the first time, she was in like a hallway or something, and she filled the hallway, and she was like bent over.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa! Which made sense because, like I mentioned in the non-spoiler review, the presence that we heard in the woods was a big, heavy presence.
Yeah.
Very plotting.
It was really cool to think that it's actually the Blair Witch out there stomping around.
Yeah.
That's scary as to me. Like,
yeah.
whoa, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But
No.
that really got me.
Well, I mean, she's pretty much a creature at this point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, after how many hundreds of years, of course she's a creature.
And if you're fans of this show, you know that my #1 movie subgenre of horror is creature features.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good mix. I think Blair Witch, creature feature, a good mix. It was a good mix.
It was
Well,
great.
also mixing in a different influence I wasn't expecting. The point I was gonna make about the doll and the braid,
Oh,
and
that was
how it was
great.
straight up voodoo doll status, man.
That
I was
was
just
great.
like, so do each of those connotate with one of the people?
One of the
They
victims.
had
Oh,
to.
it
Yes,
had,
yeah,
it had
yeah.
her hair. That's the only difference.
Yeah.
Was it had
Oh,
her hair.
You're
Yeah.
right.
I
Nice
didn't even
catch,
think about
Andrew.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
She says it
And
right
then-
before.
So
that
let's
she
explain
breaks
real
it.
quick.
Because there were so many.
Let's
different
explain.
Ones,
They wake up one night, or in the middle
it's
of the
supposed
night.
to be one morning. It's
Yeah.
7 a.m.
It's 7
and
a.m., but it's still
dark.
night out. And
Yeah.
when they wake up,
'Cause they've obviously
the
gone
second
through-
time they wake up once, and there's a couple of dolls, or stick dolls.
Right.
And this time they wake up and there's
Which the Blurds admitted to making.
exactly. The Blair Witch nerds admitted to making these dolls and putting them up. They're like, we made them because it's real and we need you guys to believe it, and they get sent away.
Right.
That's another spoiler we can talk about a little bit later. But the second time they wake up, there's dozens and dozens
Yeah.
of dolls,
They're surrounded.
all
Yeah.
varying sizes, including one that got bumped into and like swung like
Yeah.
it was a massive tree trunk in itself.
Right.
Their whole campsite was circled.
Circled by it,
these
and one of the Blurds who had made her way back to the group after being lost for 5 days, i.e., 5 hours.
Right.
That's one of the time things that Fuego likes. So I'll
Oh,
let you
I
need to talk about
love
the
it.
time thing.
I love
for
it,
sure.
man.
So we'll get to that. But the Blurd that made it back, the female Blurd, finds one and she's like, it's my hair. They tied the little stick doll with her hair, and that's the moment that you see in the trailer where the other female character grabs it and snaps it, and then you hear this "Rah!" and the girl's like shaking and stuff, and then you see that the Blurd got snapped in half.
Yeah,
like
she's like
Like it
doubled
was
over,
immediate.
broken.
Like she's like.
it was like
it was immediate.
what we're led to believe is as soon as
Yeah.
the girl snapped the thing, she got snapped in half.
Yeah.
And so when we see her, she's laying on the forest floor, snapped in half, like
bleeding out too.
Big
oh,
time.
it was
Voodoo
so
doll status,
quality,
man.
man. That
Voodoo
was
doll.
awesome.
Yeah.
What else? Okay, do you want to talk about time, or do you want to talk about the one we just mentioned?
Well, I was just gonna talk. Well, you're talking about time, but that was one of the things that actually pulled me out of it.
Okay.
Really? That was one of the best parts for me, was the fact that time did
let me
not
explain
pass
and then you say why it didn't
properly
work
there,
for you.
which was so fascinating because they obviously stepped into a vortex, I'm assuming, or something, or some other world where that house is still there, where they can't get out of these woods, even if they're going south the entire damn time, they're still walking in circles. I mean, everything was totally effed in that aspect, and so I thought it was fascinating when they're like waking up at 7 a.m. and there's no sunlight and it's still dark, and the spot you touched on where they're like, yeah, we've been wandering for 5 days and we're just seeing you guys. So just time and space was obviously totally askew and totally screwed wherever the hell they ended up. So
Well, and it was cool. The video that brought them was the video that they ended up making.
And
I loved that.
And I
thought it
loved
was
what he implied too. He was like, well, maybe I was just, brought here to bring you guys here. And it
Yeah.
was like, yeah, buddy.
Yeah, clearly.
That's exactly right.
Well,
So yeah, you didn't like that?
the reason why I didn't like it is because it kind of took me away from it. Because like one of the things I liked in the first one, like I was saying earlier, was that you had the breaks and you had the daylight, you had the time to see what was
Right.
going on, you had the time to see all the different stuff that was happening in the woods after they wake up, and just being night all the time, it just kind of got a little bit too much for me, because it's like
That's
I
fair.
can't see anything that's going on, and I
That's
guess
fair.
that's supposed to make them more intense, I guess, because in the woods were so dense.
That's what made it more effective for me. Like the concept of what they found themselves in this one felt way scarier to me than the original concept of night and day and regularity and all that other stuff. It's like when you realize you are not somewhere where the natural rules apply, that is far more frightening.
Well, and that's not the first time I've seen that in a found footage movie. Marcia, I think you've seen this one too, but if you guys have seen Grave Encounters, that was the first time I experienced the fact that they go in to investigate this, I think, old prison for ghost activity, and they wait for morning, and their watches hit like 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and they're like, it's still dark out. Yeah. And it's, so I'd seen that before. That wasn't exactly new. And yeah, like Marcia said, I can see why that would be a sticking point for some people, because that wasn't in the first one. There is no established reason why suddenly time gets messed up.
Right. Like, I think it kind of touches base.
It's a cool addition, but there's no basis for it in the past.
Well, no, I think what they're trying to touch on was that nobody ever found the house. So how do they explain that? Well, the house is in a different time or concept.
Like I said, they stepped into a thinny Stephen King status. And
however, it doesn't really match, because why didn't it happen to the first group of people or anybody else since then? You know what I mean?
To say it didn't, because they found that house that nobody else could find.
Well, it didn't, because we watched the first found footage movie and it was daytime.
Well, they still had, still had daytime
but that's
in
what
this
I'm
movie,
then,
you know?
But it went away at some point. It's just, it's a weird contradiction. They never set that rule up in the first one, so to have it come out of nowhere now, it's a little strange. I understand it.
Well, I'm going to interject and say that God's a wheel and that things are cyclical.
Okay, well, this isn't a Stephen King movie.
So I came away with 3 questions.
Okay.
Really?
From the first one, did the teeth play any significance?
What teeth?
They pulled the one guy's teeth out.
Yeah, the dude with the long hair, when Heather found those teeth wrapped up in the flannel.
And the screaming becomes a big thing because
she mimics.
She mimics voices to get people to turn, and everybody finds out that's not what you want to do. So with the whole teeth, is that like, was that supposed to be their sign? Like, hey, he can't talk to you. His teeth were pulled out, yet he's still hearing the voice
or something. Interesting.
I didn't know.
I think it might have just come back to the whole voodoo aspect of it, you know, where she
maybe
bound
she has to
him.
pull the teeth out to mimic the voice or something.
Could be.
She bound him
I
somehow.
felt like that was something where they could have easily picked up and explained it in 2 seconds in the new one, and they just chose not to.
They left
and
that.
that's like one.
I didn't feel like I didn't feel like that was a big omission. But what was question number 2?
I thought that just meant that he was dead.
At the house, in the first one guy's in the corner, and then she screams and nothing really happens, and the one chick falls out of the tree and she gets pulled off camera, but nothing really happens.
That was one of the best parts of my opinion.
Are we just to assume they're dead?
Yeah.
They're done.
Yeah.
They're dead.
The witch pulled her away.
Yeah, it's a horror movie, man. They're dead.
I don't know. It just seemed like those are the only ones where, like, we see people get pulled off camera, and presumably, I mean, the one chick actually gets killed, snapped
That's
in half.
true.
There's
a lot of off-camera death. That's true. That's true.
So
you are. That's fair. That's a fair criticism. You are left to sort of assume what happened to more than one character, and when there's only 6, that's not the greatest.
I thought
thing.
her fault taking a 20-foot drop was out of a tree.
Honestly, I think the only ambiguous part was the other brother, the other black dude, who was like staring at the wall. You know, when they first entered that house.
That was his ghost.
Yeah, it was his ghost. It was
yeah, because the black guy had a tree fall on him.
Yeah.
And then got taken by
and then the only person that actually got bloody killed was the other Blair Witch nerd.
No, the guy who got
stabbed,
the blurred who got stabbed in the neck.
Yeah. Because he was serving the witch.
#blurred.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing where
Wasn't
he ends
that
up...
though?
You gotta do what she says!
Well, I mean, he had stepped in and become what that older guy was who killed all the kids. So
there you go.
So they actually
you have
pretty
to do
much,
what the witch says.
Yeah, so they did spell out the fact that she does tempt and enchant or possess or something, you know?
Well, you want to stay alive.
That did explain why, because I was, before we went into this movie, I actually asked,
I didn't like that twist.
Them why, what's the connect, that's the problem I had with the first one, they didn't connect why the serial killer had anything to do with the Blair Witch.
Well, they did talk about that too. They said that he might have been hearing voices, but they never.
I guess
really
that just went by me. I guess that just went by me.
They
but
did talk about it in this movie. They talked about.
Oh well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. They left that out in the first one, so there was no connection.
But I made that connection before we even left. I'm like, oh, the witch is obviously the one who was the puppeteer. We had that whole.
I understand. I'm saying the first movie alone didn't didn't give you that impression.
It gave me. That's what I'm saying.
But they didn't tell you that. This one told you that. Well, you're weird.
I'm smarter than you.
One last thing with the light. Was the moment at the end the only time they used the light?
Yeah, I was worried they were going UFO when that happened.
Yeah, well, again, that was something where...
And they didn't explain it either. They're
that
like, what the hell was that?
That might have been a time shift thing.
Might have been.
That might have been the signifier of the time shift.
Well, because we all know cause a wheel and things are cyclical.
Jesus, shut up.
Anyway, it's the first time we have the chance of somebody seeing her, so it was like maybe this is the whole vision thing, but that doesn't really happen because... we end up seeing what happens, and even this is a spoiler reveal. I don't want to tell you because
come on,
say it all.
They end up looking at her, and that's all it takes.
That's what I was
and that ties in with the point that I think we were both wanting to make. She's like a Medusa, pretty much.
Well, yeah, that's. I mean, if you actually look at her, she gets you.
Yeah.
So that ties
Otherwise
into the point I was making in the non-spoiler review. The tie-in with the snot shot from the first movie was in this film. Our main character realizes that if you look at her, she'll kill you, but she also needs to know where she's at. So she pulls the phone out, turns it sideways selfie style, and uses it as that shot. She's in the corner and she's using it to look for the witch and turning it and putting it on this side and turning it. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's a great way to use the shot that made the first movie famous and use it in a scary way.
Yeah.
It's the last thing that closes out the movie. And it was done really well. She's using it as she backs up, to try and get out of the house. And
the hyena laugh that was going on.
That was great.
It was like a...
Oh yeah. She was well, not hyena laugh. She was she was like hyperventilating. She was like, it was that. It was a lot of that, and it got a little over the top at one point. It made the crowd giggle.
Yeah, that was the point where it reminded me of the first film, where I was just like, okay, this is getting a little incessant, a little overdone, but
I still liked it. I thought it was creepy.
Dude, I felt so bad for her when she was crawling through that hole, though, especially for the sheer fact that you know.
If you get claustrophobic,
I felt so.
Beware.
I had to make myself breathe. I was like,
I did too.
I'm in a big room.
Yeah, because I was
I'm
thinking,
in a
I
big
did too.
room.
I literally had to tell. I looked
bitch.
around at the crowd. I'm like, okay, no, I'm not in this tunnel.
Yeah.
I was getting that way.
You're like, I can't move. I can't move.
I totally inhaled. I was just like sucking it in, just like her, man. I was right there with her.
The character has to crawl through tunnels, which is in the trailers.
Yeah.
And it is unnerving as hell because she gets stuck. And you don't know if something's behind her, what the deal is, but she's in, and it's right up, and because it's the found footage, so the camera's right in front of her, facing her, and she's just screaming, and there's nothing.
Where she was reaching for the.
Oh my god! I'm getting.
Getting
talking about something.
Well,
it got to me. Oh,
it did.
Was that the explanation for the green sludge from the first one?
I was thinking she was hitting the water. I was like, they should have made it less like water and more sludgy. That would have explained that. I agree.
Yeah, it was like moderate. It was like mid-range. It was like coloration. It looked like it.
Let's give it the benefit of the doubt and say
yes,
that's what that
like,
was.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking, okay, the kids, this is how they tunnel out. They get out of the house and they bang, they mess with the campers and stuff like that. That's why there would be the sludge. If it was the witch, no sludge.
They're saying when they burned down the house, they found the tunnels, and so that way they could get anywhere. So it makes sense that the witch was
Didn't
the
they
one.
also say the tunnels didn't lead anywhere though? I
No,
totally
they
remember
said
them
that she
saying
could get around.
No, it was like
she had
an old
to bust
underground railroad type thing.
She had to bust through the end anyway.
Yeah, because I was thinking the whole time she was going to come to a dead end, and all that crawling was going to be for naught. And
she ended
not
up
almost
back.
did. Almost did.
She ended up back where she started.
Well, that was the interesting.
Right back
there
where
was one
crazy
thing
Afro
that-
killer dude was.
There was one thing I wish they would have done a little differently with the foot, with the infected foot. Like the
point
girl.
with the leech. Oh my god, man, I was cringing.
Leech?
It wasn't a leech.
No, that was a piece of plant.
Was it?
Whatever it was that cut her in the stream started growing in her foot, and it had grown up. That's what I got out of it.
Because they didn't really.
Well, no, because
the
talking
about how
the thing was right here.
Yeah, but don't they
and it
mention
led all the
leeches,
way down to her foot.
I was thinking that, like, based on
which is in a trailer as well.
Well, I was thinking that just based on the weird time and space of everything, and the fact that time is not going by properly, the infection spread up, and there was like leech that was in her
No,
foot.
it wasn't a leech.
Oh no,
I
it was
didn't
it was a
But
vine.
when it moved
That's
in
why I
her
said the
foot,
runes.
I thought it
The
was gonna
runes,
be. I thought they were gonna go somewhere else.
What I
with
thought it was.
I still stick with leech.
It wasn't a leech.
I thought it was a piece of bone or a nerve or something because they timed it with this snapping sound. And
Because like she walked on it.
Whatever it was in
it was
there
like,
was
if it
making
would-
that noise when it
would
moved.
make a sense if it was a
Well-
stick or whatever, and she stepped on it wrong and it snapped it, and it was tied in with her.
untouched.
I thought she was gonna be possessed.
Untouched though, as the guy's peeling off the bandage, nobody does anything and it snaps
It
on its
pulses.
Yeah, that was
And
one of the
moved.
biggest cringe moments in the entire
Yeah.
movie
Yeah.
for me.
That's
But
why I was thinking
Aside
that
from
maybe.
when the plant was pulled out of the
I
light.
think it was just. I thought it was a really bad infection because it was
That's what
just
I
like
thought, too.
pus coming out, and then she
Yeah.
starts
Yeah.
pulling something out.
Well, and the
bad
fact that-
infection
I
doesn't do
imagine
that.
you get an infection with a plant growing.
Yeah.
Think
inside
about
of
it though
you.
with the time though. They think they're only out there for 2 days.
Like I
if
said,
5 days
yeah.
goes by,
of a
a
nasty
kind
infection.
of
Yeah.
infection
It's gonna
becomes a
spread
nasty.
But
right
it
up your
doesn't
A
leg.
plant
move.
could grow, yeah.
But
Absolutely.
an infection doesn't move like there's a creature or plant inside of it. I thought there
Well,
was
we can
gonna
agree
be.
to disagree on this one. That's all right. Thank you for being on my side.
Something
Sir
about a
Mercer.
wheel turning, right?
That's okay, Marcia. We're right.
All right, now if I can finish my point, was hoping that they were gonna maybe make her like kind of like possessed. That's what I was getting at, is because I thought it was gonna go a completely different way than it did. And then going back to the house, I realized the house was right at the starting point with the broken tree. You guys caught that, right?
I did see that. Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah,
so
the
they
part
knew
they
where
said
it was
the
the whole
lightning
time.
had gone into the ground and uprooted
Yeah,
it from
it was at the
yeah.
same. It was still
almost
at
like a
the same
landmark
starting
with
point.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Can I say that my
That,
least
I guess,
favorite?
Yeah, cause a circle.
Of course it is. This man is learning, guys. I gotta say, my least favorite character was the one looking for his sister, though.
He was
boring.
a little bit of a blank slate.
Yeah, I mean, everybody else was more interesting from the girl who had the motives of exploiting his cause to, the friend.
He
who
served
his
his
purpose.
job.
Yeah.
He
served his
literally
purpose.
served his purpose.
That
Yeah.
He did exactly what he was supposed to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the love
My
interest
sister's
thing
still
goes
alive
good.
20 years later. She's alive 20 years later. I don't think so, buddy.
I was
She was in
hoping
the house.
she was
Hey,
gonna cameo,
she
though.
was in the house.
I did
Oh,
like
well, I would
how,
imagine her spirit, just like all those children and
Yeah,
the black
absolutely.
dude and everybody else who was killed in that. I mean, yeah.
She's a stick
I
doll
did
now.
like how they did the whole. He went all the way up to the stairs and they came all the way back down. The only thing that bothered me was that the basement was different.
Well, there was a lot different.
The
as we talked
basement
about.
looked similar,
It
but
was
they did end up in
completely
the
different.
attic.
Because when they went all the way down to the basement, in the first one you went all the way down the basement. Right was the corner
Yeah.
where Mike was. The
She
basement.
turned
wasn't-
right a little bit, but in this one she had to snake around a
Yeah,
wall
there.
to do it.
Yeah,
It
the
was a little
basement was
bit big.
completely
Hey,
different.
More money, man.
A little bit, but they had to just alter some for
It
production.
could
no big
have
thing.
still been the same.
It didn't. It
I'm
didn't
telling
make
you right
enough
now,
of a difference.
It
to
wasn't
change
the
it,
same
but-
house. There's no way they.
Yeah, there's no way it was the
Well,
same
and
house.
also,
They
like
had
we
to
said,
angle it.
it wasn't the same forest either. I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
No,
So,
it wasn't
you know.
because the.
But it
force
was
way
good
more
enough.
different.
It was
Well,
close
20
enough.
years will do something.
The only thing
I
I can
suppose
think of
so.
is if we go back to the whole warp space and time.
Yeah, they
thing,
went through a
was
vortex
that
and maybe they
were
actually
now,
crossed over.
Maybe the
Now-
house changes, guys.
Maybe they're there
Can I finish
before
my point?
these other people.
Going back to the whole time and space thing, if they were brought into the time when the house did exist, then there would have been more forest. Or even if we were back into the witch's time, which would have been the 1800s, there would be more. It would be more dense because it wouldn't have been as popular.
Fair enough.
Possible. I guess I'll take that.
All right, take it.
Well, if there's any other points for the spoiler section, no? Anyone?
No, nothing I can think of.
All right. I think we covered this pretty extensively, but we're all pretty happy. I mean, if there's going to be a release we talk about this long, it should probably be Blair Witch.
It was
Yeah.
way better than the Blair Witch Project.
Yes, absolutely. And better than Book of Shadows. So,
Yeah.
I enjoyed all three movies in their own. So, if
But
you're,
was this
if
the
you're
best?
a
Was this the
true
best in your
fan,
opinion?
It was. That was the best because it had the most
Easily the
money and it
best.
had the production
Not-
value.
It was the best movie. Not just because of the money and production value, but it was the best movie all around.
It wasn't the one that made me fall in love with the series.
Oh.
What was that one?
The
tears.
first one. The Blair Witch.
Jeez.
All right, well,
Adam
I think that's
Wingard.
going to do it, guys. So thanks very much for watching our spoiler discussion of Blair Witch 2016. I've been Cecil Laird.
Gracias, I've been having Fuego.
I'm Andrew Mercer.
No, Mark Parker.
And until next time, remember,
Stay scared.